Hey guys, tonight we step off a mud-dark road into a village that breathes damp and exhales wood smoke, where torches cough in their iron brackets, and a steward's voice threads the dusk counting rents like beads. You feel the lane tug at your shoes, geese patrol with comically stern faces. A pot of onion and oat pottage keeps sighing as if the lid knows tomorrow's math. You probably won't survive this, unless you learn the quiet arithmetic that peasants do with weather, neighbors, and nerves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening, post your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing the map light up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ease past a cart sunk to the axle, and the village's curriculum begins with smell and sound. Onions softening on the hearthstone, damp wool steaming by the fire, a cow drawing long, patient breaths from the byre end of the house. Mainstream fact to pin to your sleeve. Across late medieval Western Europe, most villagers live within a manorial system, working narrow strips scattered through open fields and owing either labor days, corvée, or cash rents. That scatter, high, low, wet, dry, spreads risk so one hailstorm can't erase the year. Light joke 1. The steward prefers sunshine for collections, less mud on his shoes, and fewer places for you to accidentally not be home. A boy trots by with a bundle of rushes. His mother will dip them in tallow to make rushlights, the skinny, valiant cousins of candles that sputter bravely and drip optimism on the table. At the well, a rumor rides the bucket chain. Sickness again near the port. Swellings like bruised plums. Bells pacing too fast. You're handed a wooden jack of small ale, safer than the ditch. Brewing scalds the doubts from water. Historians still argue whether medieval people avoided water by rule, or simply preferred ale when grain and time allowed. Light joke 2. Small ale, big courage. Especially after you spill some and pretend you were watering the lane. The steward's ledger clacks names and duties into the evening. Fees for the Lord's mill and oven. Banalities. So grain becomes bread in the proper taxable places. A reminder about Thursday's work draining the fish pond. A frown for anyone accidentally cutting green wood. Faces tilt like sunflowers as people do peasant math. If you give 2 forced days this week, can you bargain a bushel at Candlemas? Quirky tidbit. Some accounts still ride on tally sticks, willow notched for sums, then split lengthwise so lord and tenant each hold a half. The notches match only when the halves reunite. Medieval 2-factor authentication, minus the recovery email. Light joke 3. Lose your half, and there's no forgot password, just remembered problem. Inside a cottage, smoke stratifies in gentle bands, and the room shows the durable geometry of survival. Hearth in the center. Bedbox along the wall, a shelf of unremarkable miracles, salt, a twist of garlic, a pinch of something green, and at the far end, the slow, orchard-warm breath of a cow whose body heat is both blanket and bank. The thatch above remembers every storm and is fully prepared to give the next one a lecture. Another mainstream anchor, oats, rye, and barley are the village's reliable choir. Wheat, when it behaves, is the soloist with expensive taste. Historians still argue whether diets here are chronically protein-poor or surprisingly resilient thanks to dairy, pulses, and after-harvest gleaning that stitches calories into the seams. You don't settle the debate. You just watch butter scraped thinner whenever plague talk thickens. A rowan sprig is tied with red thread to the roof beam. A charm against ill will, drafts, or both. The door curtain lifts on a modest breeze. Outside, geese hold a meeting about your shoes. Someone jokes that the manor owns the land, the saints own the seasons, and the geese own everything else. You note how people hedge every bet. Practical measures, pious gestures, a pinch of superstition to keep courage company. That cocktail, half weather report, half prayer, will carry you from this smoky evening into a thin but survivable dawn. Before the sun makes up its mind, you are already on the hedgeway, boots dew dark, sleeve hem tasting of nettle. The village moves like a low tide toward the commons, a quilt of meadow, woodlot, heath, and marsh edge stitched together by habit. A horn note, short and cheerful, nudges the cattle out. Geese provide managerial oversight with their usual performance reviews. You fall in with neighbors who speak in weather and chores. Wind wrong for hay. St. Swithin's still negotiating. Mind the ditch, it bites. The Commons is not kindly wilderness. It is a ruled book with muddy pages. Pasture first. You turn the gate latch, and the herd flows through in a hush of hooves and breath. Every holding in the village has a stint, a fixed allowance for animals, parceled out so grass stays grass and not wishful thinking. Mainstream fact to pin behind your ear. Across late medieval Western Europe, especially in English open-field villages, common rights are defined in custom and recorded in manor rolls. Pasture for grazing, pannage in autumn to send pigs into oak and beech for acorns, estovers for taking dead wood and hedge trimmings, turbary to cut peat on assigned plots. Break the rules and the beetle notices, obey them, and the year keeps breathing. Light joke 1. The beetle's eyebrows are an entire legal code. One look for, put that branch down, another for, and don't think I didn't see the second one. You help a girl carry a rake to the stubble fields where gleaning turns patience into calories. Fingers comb the ground for shy kernels the sickle missed. Each find is a tiny victory, the kind that tastes better than it looks. A woman taps a small bell to begin, quirky tidbit. Some parishes ring a gleaning bell at set hours, so the poor start fair and finish fair, a market made of mercy and mud. Historians still argue whether gleaning is a clear legal right, a tolerated charity, or a spectrum that hardened into law by repetition. What you know, watching the baskets, is that dinner behaves better when arguments are settled by bells rather than elbows. Light joke 2. If calories were shy rabbits, this field would still be a very successful warren. The woodlot reads like a slow alphabet. Dead branches, yes. Green boughs, no. Windfall, share. Coppice poles, by assignment. People cut on the slant so rain sheds and rot sulks elsewhere. You shoulder a bundle that thrums your collarbone with homely importance. This is heat for stew, light for mending. Smoke that both flavors meet and persuades mosquitoes to attend services elsewhere. Someone mentions last autumn's acorn mast ran heavy. Pigs came home fat enough to influence parish politics. You scratch one bristled back, and it regards you with the calm scorn of a small, snorting banker. Your credit is acceptable. Do not squander it. At the marsh edge, a pair of women carve peat into careful loaves and set them to dry on low racks. The cut faces look like pages from a brown book, each line a winter evening. You ask how many stacks will see a family through deep frost. As many as you can carry before your humor breaks, one says, then laughs as if she remembers all the times humor broke first. Historians still argue whether a broad, medieval timber crisis truly gnawed the countryside, or whether peat, coppicing, and careful hedgerow management buffered the shortfall well enough. You do not resolve it, but you watch how every stick here has a job description. Children ferry brushwood twice their size and narrate the heroism loudly. You trade them a sip of small ale for a handful of green chives found along the ditch bank. It's the kind of barter that tastes like a secret. Up on the heath, the shepherd whistles a tune that means, "Mind the gap," and the flock behaves as if they've read the minutes. A rowan sprig, like the one tied in last night's cottage, hangs at the gate, red berries dark with dew. Charms work best when the rules do too. Light joke 3. The geese hold a short union meeting to demand more fallen oats. Management promises to look into it. You pause at a boundary oak where, each spring, the parish beats the bounds. A ritual walk, knocking markers with wands so children learn the edges in their bones. It's part map, part memory theater, a procession of feet teaching the land to the people and the people to the land. The steward may hold parchment, but the commons holds choreography, and choreography is harder to fake. You tuck that thought next to your rushlight of optimism. By mid-morning, the pasture has arranged itself into contentment. Cows settle like slow ships. A boy blows the horn again to fetch a stray. Someone jokes about pannage permits being worth more than gold when acorns come down like rain. Mainstream anchor to pocket, because each household's arable strips are scattered across multiple furlongs, some wet, some dry. The commons ties those scattered risks into shared buffers. Milk when grain sulks, wood when wind snarls, bacon from last fall's mast when Lent feels longer than advertised. Your bundle of sticks is small, but the lane home feels shorter because it belongs to everybody. On the walk back, a neighbor murmurs that the steward wants to tighten stints this year. Last winter's grazing ran too close to the bone. The manor court, however, has long memory and short patience for unilateral ideas. Elders recount who had how many cows when your grandmother wore her feast day ribbon. Historians still argue whether these village institutions mostly preserved equity or covertly favored the better placed. In the present tense, your impression is simple. Fairness here is a daily negotiation conducted in mud, bell notes, and the exact weight of a brushwood bundle. The sun finally decides to be present. You step off the hedgeway and back onto the lane with your shoulder humming and your stomach already planning pottage. Commons work does not feel like harvest glory. It feels like brushing teeth, ordinary, unskippable, and mysteriously critical to everything else. You pass the geese again. They sign off on your morning with a chorus that sounds suspiciously like applause. You smile, because applause is applause, even if it comes with feathers. You step from the hedgeway onto the high ground where the fields open like pages, long ribbony strips running side by side, each one a sentence your neighbors have been rewriting for generations. The village works a 3-field rotation, 1 block sown in winter grain, usually wheat or rye, 1 in spring grain, oats or barley, and 1 left fallow to rest beneath weeds, grazing, and good intentions. Mainstream fact to lace into your boot. By the later Middle Ages, much of Western Europe, especially north of the Alps, has shifted toward this 3-field pattern, which raises average yields by staggering risk across seasons and letting livestock manure the fallow. Light joke 1. Call it medieval multitasking. When your field is doing nothing, the cows are doing something profoundly helpful upon it. You walk a balk, the grassy strip that separates arable lanes, and count the work in your head. Plow the winter field in autumn, broadcast seed by hand like you're throwing dull confetti, then harrow with a spiky frame to tuck the seed under. Come spring, repeat with oats or barley. The fallow? It's where the animals graze short and the weeds lie low. later to be turned under as green manure. The heavy moldboard plow you passed earlier cuts deep, flipping soil like thick pages so rain drains and roots bite. Paired with the horse collar, remember our iron and hooves chat, a team can turn claggy earth without bruising the animal's windpipes. Historians still argue whether the productivity gains came more from the heavy plow itself, from the rise of horse traction, or from the calendar magic of splitting winter and spring sowings. The villagers argue mostly with clouds. You help a neighbor cast seed from a wicker basket, your hand learning an arc so steady it could be a lullaby. The air fills with chaff and modest ambition. A boy trots behind scaring crows with an enthusiasm entirely unrelated to results. Quirky tidbit. On Plow Monday, the first Monday after Epiphany, some villages haul a decorated plow through the lanes, collecting coins to fund the parish's plow light, a candle kept burning before a saint's image for good crops. In the leanest years, the candle burns short and the jokes run long. You have already learned that long jokes heat a room almost as well as peat. Light joke 2. The geese consider Plow Monday a parade in their honor and attempt to marshal it. Geese, like stewards, love a list. You kneel and pinch a legume plant, field peas, perhaps, or beans. You don't say nitrogen fixation, that future word hasn't arrived, but you do say, the peas make the ground kinder, and everyone nods because that's exactly what they notice. When grain sulks, peas shrug. When bread runs thin, pottage thickens with beans, and the day stops scolding you. Another mainstream anchor, mixing cereals with pulses evens out nutrition and risk. Oats for porridge and animal feed, rye for dark bread, barley for malt and soup, peas and beans for cheap protein. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were monotonous by necessity or surprisingly varied by strategy. You count dishes by seasons and decide variety tastes like timing. You trace your boot along a strip's boundary and sense how the open field mosaic spreads risk like butter, thin but wide. Here the slope drains fast. There a swale holds just enough water to flirt with mildew. Your family's share is scattered on purpose. A few strips in the winter furlong, a few in spring, some good, some grudging. If a hailstorm bites one corner, another keeps chewing its way toward harvest. The steward does not call this kindness, he calls it custom. Light joke 3. Custom is the village's way of saying, because we said so, with footnotes. Mid-morning, a neighbor lifts a tally stick to note borrowed seed. Your half goes into your pouch, the other half into his. You like the way the paired notches refuse to lie to either of you. A girl plucks a rowan berry from the hedgerow and pockets it for luck. You've started to suspect half of agriculture works because people believe it will. Belief long enough for weather to change its mind. The wind shifts and you sniff the breweries warming for a small ale run. That safer sip you've begun to trust almost as much as clean rain. Historians still argue whether people here drank per head more ale than we imagine, or simply used it as water with punctuation. Either way, the punctuation keeps sentences of labor readable. By noon, the field hums like a well-tuned beehive. Plow creak, harness jingle. The soft applause of harrow teeth sifting clods. You take a bite of yesterday's rye loaf, dark, sour steady, and chase it with chives you traded off the ditch bank, a callback to the common small barter that gives cheap food a tiny trumpet fanfare. Someone mentions the Great Famine years again, 1315 to 1317, rain walling off the sky, seed rotting in the furrows, bread buying patience instead of fullness. The lesson they kept, lean into oats and rye, love beans without apology, Keep a hand in spring grain even if winter wheat looks glamorous. You love glamorous in theory. In practice, you love dinner. Toward evening, a thin shower needles the horizon, and the talk turns to harvest customs. Who brings the last sheaf? Who twists it into a corn dolly, another quirky fragment, to hang in the rafters until the first plowing next year? Is it magic? Is it memory? Historians still argue whether these rites preserve pagan echoes or are simply Christianized neighborliness with excellent craft skills. You don't mind which. You like the way a straw figure remembers sun when you enter winter. You walk home on a path laced with straw, the village's calendar already in your step. Autumn plow, winter watch, spring sow, summer weed, harvest bind, and all the while the fallow quietly knitting health under hooves. The three-field dance is not glamorous, but it is generous. It keeps options open, spreads bets without spilling courage, and tells hunger it will have to queue like everyone else. You pat your pocket, feel the half-tally's ridges, and grin. 2 halves make a trust, 3 fields make a chance. By late afternoon, the cottage smells like a vote in favor of survival. Smoke winds up from the hearth, a pot murmurs in slow syllables, and you stand guard with a wooden spoon like a kindly quartermaster. Tonight is pottage night. Then again, almost every night is pottage night. Grain thickened with peas or beans, softened with cabbage or leeks, sweetened accidentally by a stray carrot, salted on purpose because salt is what turns liquid regret into dinner. You tear yesterday's rye into flotillas and let them sail. Mainstream fact to float beside those crumbs. For much of medieval Europe, pottage and coarse bread form the baseline diet, with pulses, cabbage, onions, and occasional pork trimmings, or dairy rounding the bowl. It's ordinary, yes, but it's a nutrition plan disguised as soup. Light joke 1. Pottage is also a time machine. Stir long enough and you arrive at tomorrow. On a peg hangs your winter insurance, strips of salt pork and smoked fish, the color of late sunsets. Brine tubs and smoke cure what fields cannot promise, and pickled odds, cabbage, turnips, even green walnuts, keep a garden whisper alive when snow edits the world to grayscale. You tamp a crock of cabbage with a wooden pestle until it sighs. Garlic sulks nearby, waiting to be heroic. The pickle is more than zest. It's a memory device. Bite, and you remember July. Historians still argue whether fermented cabbage spreads primarily from German-speaking regions, or bubbles up in parallel wherever barrels, salt, and patience coexist. Either way, it meets the tongue like a reunion. Across the lane, a brewster, that's a woman brewer more often than not, rakes the mash with arms that can carry a household through Lent. Water heats, barley malts, yeast finds something grand to do with a quiet afternoon, and by week's end there's small ale, the table drink that's safer than ditch water, because boiling and brewing fence out the worst surprises. Mainstream anchor. In towns and many villages, the assize of bread and ale, a set of rules going back to the 13th century, regulates price and quality, with officials testing loaves and brews so bakers and brewers don't stretch profit faster than dough. Quirky tidbit you'll tell forever. Some English boroughs appoint ale conners, officials who literally sit in fresh ale puddles on a wooden bench while wearing leather breeches. If they stick when they rise, the ale's sugar content, and thus strength, is judged sound. Light joke 2. Medieval QA testing is thorough and occasionally damp. You ladle out a taste and adjust with herbs from the beam. Sage, thyme, maybe a reckless pinch of pennyroyal when someone insists their aunt swears by it. The pottage thickens into a geography of luck. beans from the spring field, oats from the safer strip, a coin-sized slab of pork left over from last autumn's glorious acorn mast. Bless the oak as you stir. You drop in a bread trencher to soak. The trencher is both plate and later a charitable idea, because the gravy-soaked slab will head to a poorer neighbor when the bell rings. Historians still argue whether trenchers are more common in towns than in hamlets like this. You only argue with the cat, who believes trenchers are a feline right. By the door sits a cask of herring, proof that your dinner can know the sea without ever meeting a wave. Lenten rules and inland cravings make fish trade a quiet river of silver through the year. Barrels from northern waters, hoops creaking, salt kissing everything it meets. You set aside 2 fish for Friday on a Tuesday, because calendars are optimistic and you are practical. Light joke 3. Herring keeps so well that somewhere a barrel from last winter is still considering whether to become next spring's ancestor. The oven in the Lord's domain yard glows like a small bossy moon. You'll pay the banality fee to bake tomorrow's loaves there, or share hearths with neighbors if the steward's eyebrows are feeling generous. Under the assize, a loaf's price floats with grain cost, so bakers don't drown either. You've learned to read a loaf's weight like a weather report. A heel cut too thin says the harvest sulked. A generous loaf says the abbey's mills ran happy. Historians still argue whether medieval caloric intake regularly met heavy labor needs, or whether the pendulum swung between abundance and deficit with grim frequency. Your spoon reports that on nights like this, beans do most of the convincing. You sip small ale and feel the warmth persuade your shoulders to be civilized. Is water truly unsafe? Not everywhere, not always. Running springs, rain barrels well watched, and boil-ups for cooking make life perfectly drinkable. But boiled, brewed liquid is insurance with bubbles, and insurance is habit-forming. The geese, incidentally, believe they invented small ale. They will accept credit in oats. A knock. You lift the latch. A neighbor slips in with a tally stick to borrow salt and promise return after market day. Split, notched, matched. Trust you can hold in 2 hands. She notices the rowan sprig above your hearth and nods. Hers has 3 berries left and opinions about drafts. You trade her a spoonful of pottage for a scandalous story about an ale connor's breeches and a bench. Quality control is everyone's business when winter is long. Steam pearls the rafters and settles on the cow's patient back. The beast looks like a saint in a fog and chews theology at an admirable pace. You tear the trencher, hand the soft half across the warm air, and feel that small, precise joy that doesn't shout. The pot goes on murmuring, the pickle waits for the next bite to wake, and the ale thinks kindly of tomorrow. The menu is not glamorous, it is a system. Boil what's doubtful, salt what must last, ferment what would fade, share what can be spared, and keep humor within reach of the spoon. You stir clockwise, because someone's grandmother said so, and because even if it doesn't help the soup, it helps the story. Morning stands bright on iron. You walk toward the smithy by habit more than plan, following the metallic heartbeat, hammer, anvil, hiss, like rain learning discipline. The doorway glows, bellows sigh, and the smell is a mixed sermon of hot scale, singed leather, and yesterday's charcoal. A man lifts a red-orange bar with tongs and persuades it into a plowshare, edge curving to meet the mood of stubborn clay. Mainstream fact to set like a rivet. By the high Middle Ages, much of Northern Europe uses the heavy moldboard plow with an iron share and coulter, a machine that bites deep and flips wet soils cleanly, making once difficult lands pay attention. Light joke 1. The plow doesn't exactly sing, but when it hits the right note, clay suddenly forgets how to be rude. You run fingers along a rack of iron tips, spares hoarded like winter compliments. The smith proves himself part farmer, part doctor, part therapist for metal. Nails and rivets glitter like small promises. Another man checks a horse collar, thick with stitched padding. The miracle no one names as loudly as it deserves. You fit it around your arm and feel the difference. Pressure distributes across shoulders instead of throttling the neck the way old throat and girth harnesses once did. Historians still argue whether the horse collar's spread or the heavy plow itself carries more credit for medieval productivity, or whether the real secret is the choreography. Better harness plus deep plow plus careful rotation. You decide arguments are lighter when you can hitch them to something that pulls. Outside, the wheelwright sets a rim into shape. Spokes splayed like a sunburst. A good cartwheel is a savings account you can roll. You check the ox yoke too. Oxen are steady, patient, cheapest to feed when you have rough pasture, and they don't write complaint letters. Horses, faster and more glamorous, turn a plowing day into a shortened week and a cart trip into a plausible afternoon. The village runs both. Oxen for gravitas, horses for speed. Quirky tidbit. Some teams go to the field jingling harness bells and wearing stamped harness brasses, little sunbursts and hearts, part decoration, part charm to keep eyes, human and worse, polite. Over cottage doors, a horseshoe sometimes hangs upside down to hold luck like a cup. Your rowan sprig at home nods from a distance, pretending not to be jealous. You join the line to fit iron shoes to hooves. The farrier trims with a slow, respectful rasp. Hot shoe meets horn with that memorable kiss of steam. A child watches with round eyes and the solemn understanding that this is both dangerous and normal, like lending the steward your tally stick half and trusting math to behave. Light joke too. The horse accepts the new shoes and immediately assumes it qualifies for faster oats. By mid-morning, you're in the field with the team and plow. The moldboard rises like a small wave. The iron coulter splits the earth ahead, the share scoops under, and the plow sole rolls aside like a page turned by a careful thumb. The reins braid through your fingers. The plowman's cry, little syllables of sound more tone than word, keeps the team between temptation, hedge, and comedy, ditch. The furrow opens dark, wet, promising. You can feel the day's arithmetic change, deeper cut, better drainage on this heavy soil, a tilt of the field's future toward grain instead of stubborn grass. Historians still argue whether horses truly outpull oxen on a strict calorie-for-calorie basis, or simply move faster and wear you out slower. You file the thought under "use what the village can feed" and get on with the next line. The soil tells jokes too. Pebble clacks, clay sucks, one sacrificial root ties the plow in a knot and forces you to step back, breathe, and remember you brought a spare share and a prayer. The boy working the plow stilt behind you is learning to balance like a sailor. Every slip is a lesson, every straight furrow a boast you pretend not to enjoy. Callbacks sneak in. The gleaning bell you heard last section rings faintly from a distant hamlet. Someone mentions last year's acorn mast that put bacon into rafters. Iron plus oak equals full bowls a season later. At the headland, you swing the plow with a grunt that includes 2 syllables of polite complaint and 1 of pride. A neighbor ties a cheap charm, a sprig of rowan again, near the collar buckle, against sore shoulders and sour looks, which you suspect points less at evil spirits and more at the steward's eyebrows. Quirky field custom. Some households tuck a coin or crust beneath the first turned furrow to bless the season. Bread is the village's favorite liturgy, so no one protests. Light joke 3. If offerings could guarantee weather, the church roof would be tiled with loaves by Lammas. At noon you break for small ale and a heel of rye. The team breathes in the hedgerow shade. Flies explore with missionary zeal. You retaliate with a twig, and the kind of patience only soup and iron can teach. Mainstream anchor to stash beside your spoon. Once iron fittings become common, shares, coulters, shoes, and nails, the repair economy accelerates. Smiths, wheelwrights, harness makers, and farriers weave a net under harvest. That net is made of fees, yes, but also of favors. Tally sticks split, half kept. A delayed payment matched to a promised day of carting timber when the abbey wants a new roof. You plow again, falling into the long, mindful trance of straight lines. Here's the quiet miracle. Technology you can mend with a hammer and a little heat gives poor soil the courtesy of a second try. The open field strips mean your family works wet ground in the hollow and drier loam nearer the ridge. The heavy plow likes both as long as you like blisters. This year's three-field dance, winter grain, spring grain, fallow, leans into the iron's depth. Fallow grazed close, manured lavishly, then flipped rich and dark so seed can listen for rain. Toward evening the smith passes by, curious about edges. You show him the share's nick from a buried stone. He nods, as if the stone personally apologized to him earlier. Historians still argue whether rising iron output came from improved furnaces, better trade routes, or simply more people willing to turn trees into charcoal and hills into tired places called worked out. You lean on the stilt and choose not to solve metallurgy between yawns. You do, however, choose to stop before your collarbones begin writing angry letters to your future self. You walk home, reins looped, the team satisfied and secretly vain. The lane takes your boots back with that old muddy handshake, and the geese meet you like safety inspectors, checking for straight furrows by interrogating your ankles. The smithy's door still breathes orange. Inside, someone lays out tomorrow's nails like punctuation for a sentence you haven't written yet. Iron, collar, hoof. 3 words that feel like tools and turn out to be verbs. Today, you use them, and the field answered in a darker, richer voice. One hard morning for a hungry month delayed. You'll take that bargain every time you can. The ledger arrives before the sun loses its temper. You hear it first, the clap of wood covers, the polite cough of the steward, then see it like a square, leather-bound weather system crossing the manor yard. Names will be said. Dues will be sung. You fall in with neighbors who have already put on their best patient faces, which is to say the same faces they wear for geese. The bell strikes, iron on iron, and the morning becomes a list. Mainstream fact to lace into your sleeve. The manorial court, court baron for tenurial business, court leet for minor offenses, handles the village's everyday law, recording custom and rolls and enforcing dues like rents, corvée, labor service, and the famous banalities for the lord's mill and oven. It's less a royal courtroom and more a paperwork hearth, warm when kept, cold when neglected. You watch the jury of neighbors, homage men, suitors, take their stools, and the steward opens the roll with a rustle that sounds like dry grass. Light joke 1. If rustling were a tax, the steward could retire on page 2. Your turn comes. The steward recites, 2 days ditching in the fish pond this week, 1 sack ground at the Lord's mill, a Harriet due if your cow should die inconveniently. Also, the merchant fee waived for your cousin's marriage, Congratulations with conditions. You nod as if these words are weather, inescapable, but negotiable with the right coat. Then the haggling by etiquette begins. Custom is your shield, timing is your sword. You remind the steward, mildly, that during last year's wet weeks, you gave an extra day carting stone to the domain, that the court noted it, that the field by the brook lies sulking and won't be plowed itself. The jury murmurs, a low domestic thunder. The beadle, eyebrows communicating in old law, nods once. The steward sighs and writes a graceful commutation. One ditching day this week, the second converted to a small cash payment due at Martinmas. The room exhales, arithmetic becomes survivable. Quirky tidbit, because the day loves one. The steward tallies your small fine with a split tally stick, notches for the amount. Then the willow cleaved lengthwise so the Lord's half and your half match only when married again. Medieval two-factor authentication returns, still superior to, I swear I paid. You slide your rough half into your pouch where it keeps company with a bent rowan berry from your doorway charm, and suddenly your pocket feels like an archive. A neighbor steps forward to answer a charge of greenwood taking, cutting living branches rather than collecting deadwood, estovers. She says storms did the cutting, she did the carrying. The beadle raises one eyebrow to, not yet to, no. Witnesses speak. The jury weighs memory like grain. Custom, here, is a path worn by feet. Stray too far, and the hedge complains. Historians still argue whether these courts mainly protected the poor through predictable rules, or mostly preserved the advantage of those with better neighbors and longer memories. You cannot adjudicate the historians. You can, however, watch how carefully the court ties its knot. A small fine, suspended if no further greenwood appears in her hearth by Lammas. Everyone nods. The hedge keeps its leaves. The house keeps its fire. By noon, the roll has toured its catalogue of medieval creativity. Stray pigs trespassing in pannage season, cattle grazing beyond stint, ale sold short of the assize measure, the aleconner demonstrates, breeches unseated but dignity intact. A boy who chased geese with a stick and was chased back with better technique. Light joke too. The geese win on appeal, as they always do. The steward pronounces a miracle rare as a hen's sermon. The mill's gear will be repaired at the Lord's cost before harvest. Banality fees stand, yes, but a broken mill earns nobody bread. You noticed last evening the smith laying out nails like punctuation. Now you see where those commas will go. You bring a quiet plea. The fish pond ditching day tomorrow lands atop your plow day, and the team will go sour if left idle in this weather. You offer a substitution. Send your boy to the pond with a borrowed mattock while you see the plow to the ridge. In return, you will cart timber for the abbey next week when the wheelwright says the rim is ready. The court enjoys substitutions the way a cook enjoys recipes that use leftovers. The steward writes, your boy tries not to look proud and fails. A man, hat in hand, speaks of rent arrears after a winter of coughs. He offers a bushel of oats now, a bushel at Michaelmas, and his half-tally as hostage. The jury consults custom. Grain loans in lean months, repaid in harvest cheer, have precedent older than the clerk's hand. The steward nods his ledger into generosity. Mainstream anchor to set beside your spoon. These courts, for all their fees, translate rigid dues into the flexible calendar of farm life. Labor to cash, cash to labor, today to next feast day, keeping the village from snapping like a dry twig. The afternoon turns lightly theatrical. A whisper of charters reaches the yard. Talk of a distant town selling freedom to those who can keep their heads down for a year and a day. The rumor licks ears like a warm draft. Nobody moves, but everybody thinks. Historians still argue whether flight to towns undermined manorial control, or whether lords adapted by chasing money rents anyway. You tuck the thought away like a secret crust under the first turned furrow. Not for today, but reassuring to touch. Light joke 3. Courtesy of the beadle. He finds himself a farthing for dropping the roll into a puddle and demands the puddle appear next session to answer. The jury agrees, the puddle fails to show. Justice is satisfied. By closing, the roll has fattened with notes. Defaults forgiven because a father lay sick. Amercements reduced because the gleaning bell rang late. A view of frank pledge scheduled to check that every household sits within a 10-man tithing for order. The steward's voice softens. The legal weather clears. You step out into air that smells of trampled mint and hot parchment. The court didn't reduce the world's hunger, but it shaved off the corner that would have cut. This is how burdens bend without breaking. By memory, by neighbor, by the small theater of a table, a clerk, and a jury that knows how many calves were born on your lane because their hands helped pull 2 of them. You walk home with your half-tally tapping your thigh, a friendly metronome, and think of the day's exchanges. A ditch day traded for a cart day, a fine that waits on your behavior, a rumor that waits on your courage. The village is not free, but it is flexible in the places that matter. Tomorrow you'll plow while your boy learns the ancient art of negotiating with mud. Tonight, you'll set the tally by the door, beneath the rowan sprig, where wood remembers notches and you remember names. The geese escort you the last 20 paces like solemn bailiffs. You pay them in compliments and close the latch on an evening earned. When bread runs thin, the house becomes a laboratory of dignity. You set the quern between your knees and grind oats with a rhythm that turns complaint into flour. Bran sings under your fingers. The cat, convinced it is supervising, arranges itself on the warmest square of floor. The assize of bread and ale has already ratcheted loaf sizes to follow grain prices, so the baker's loaves feel smaller by the week. You answer with oatcakes on the bakestone. Flat, quick, loyal. Mainstream fact to tuck into the apron pocket. During the Great Famine of 1315–1317, long rain, failed harvests, and animal disease spiked grain prices in manor and town accounts across northern Europe, forcing diets toward oats, rye, and anything that behaved when wheat didn't. Light joke 1. Wheat is the glamorous cousin who cancels last minute. Oats show up with sleeves rolled. You lean into stretching, more pottage, thicker with field peas and broad beans, nettles blanched, chopped fine, and smuggled into the pot under a cloak of onions. Dock seeds toasted and ground to shadow a loaf when flour sulks. Leeks pulled early because patience can't be served for supper. On a good day you sweet-talk a spoon of whey from the dairy to soften the porridge. On a very good day, a sliver of last autumn's salt pork returns like a memory. Quirky tidbit. Some kitchens keep a tiny pouch of ash salt, leached from clean wood ash, to season when true salt rations run mean. Flavor that tastes like thrift and bonfire. Historians still argue whether so-called famine breads, with ground bark or straw, were widespread practice or mostly moralizing stories copied by chroniclers. You prefer recipes that don't come with splinters. When cupboards stop answering politely, legs do the talking. You barter day labor for loaves or grain, morning threshing at the abbey barns for a measured heap in a tied corner of your apron, hauling peat for a neighbor whose husband coughs, paid in maslin, the wheat-rye mix that forgives weather's moods. mending fence in exchange for 2 measures of bare barley from a cousin's bin. Your half of a tally stick, split and notched back at the last quart, knocks softly against your palm while you walk, a wooden reminder that promises are grain you can carry. Light joke 2. The tally is patient, but your stomach has a shorter attention span and worse handwriting. You pool grain with the lane, a quiet bread club that meets with scoops and nods. Each family tips a little into the parish chest's sister bin, and the almoner keeps the key and the peace. When a week stretches too far, a measured dole comes back with more blessing than judgment. Coarse flour for a rough loaf, a promise to repay after Lammas, and sometimes a second ladle if the little ones look like candle wicks. Mainstream anchor. Many parishes and guilds organized bread doles and small grain loans, and some kept communal granaries, makeshift or formal, that smoothed the wolf's breath at the door. Historians still argue whether such relief reached the truly needy consistently or mostly buffered households, already inside the web of friends and obligations. You notice that whoever keeps the key also knows who skipped the last 2 Sundays, because boots don't argue with mud for free. Rumors blow in with the weather. Ergot in the rye in a parish over, someone says. Grain dark spotted. Bread that makes hands tremble and eyes see sermons in shadows. You sift with more attention. Scholars still argue whether ergot poisoning contributed significantly to medieval crises, or whether later ages project it backward onto every bad year. You simply winnow with care and aim for grain that doesn't sparkle suspiciously. A neighbor swears by acorn meal in lean weeks. You remember how to leach the bitterness with ash water and patience, a forest flavor that sits sturdily under onions. Another insists on barley frumenti for feast days even in famine. Barley simmered till it remembers creaminess, because ceremony helps the pot behave. Small ale, boiled and brewed, continues to stand in for doubtful water. You raise the jack to your lips and thank yesterday's boil for today's calm. Work finds new shapes when bellies ask for math. You join a mend and make do circuit, darning neighbor's hose for a scoop of rye, spinning a hank of coarse wool for a handful of peas, mending a harness strap with a row of tidy stitches in exchange for 2 herring from the cask. Salt silver lifeboats that travel far without complaint. Along the lane, the gleaning bell rings an extra hour at day's end. The beetle pretends not to see how slow everyone walks off the stubble. Light joke 3. Even the geese lower their standards, investigating nettles with professional curiosity before filing a strongly worded honk. Evenings shrink and pottage swells. You stir clockwise because someone's grandmother said so. The same one who warned against counting loaves out loud. Tempts the mice, she said with a face that brokered no debate. On the beam the rowan sprig keeps its red, resolute against drafts and despair. The cow steams gently in the byre corner, a low-breathing radiator that turns hay into warmth and milk you can convince into curds if luck wakes up. Historians still argue whether households like yours met basic calories most years, or lived on a cliff edge where a week of rain could kick you into hunger. Your spoon argues for resilience, your ledger for caution, and your patience for early bedtime. On the thinnest week, you visit the manor to commute tomorrow's labor. 1 day of ditching traded for a very specific measure of oats, and the right to cut a faggot of brushwood from the far hedge. The steward calculates. The jury of neighbors remembers you carted stone when the bridge sulked last spring. The beetle's eyebrows vote yes in a dialect everyone understands. You leave with a measure of grain heavy enough to tilt the scale of the week, and a bundle of twigs that already smells like soup. Night comes with soft arithmetic. How many oatcakes you can make before the flour asks rude questions. How many beans stretch a pot from apology to comfort. How many favors sit in the drawer next to the tally, due at harvest in sweat rather than coin? When bread runs thin, you don't run after it. You braid other strands tighter. Oats and nettles, beans and neighbors, labor and promises. A little superstition tied with red thread to keep courage from wandering. Tomorrow, if the rain minds its manners, you'll be in the field again. Tonight, you press a warm cake into a small hand and watch a face relax. That counts. It always counts. The rumor changes its shoes and becomes a knock. Doors latch with that intimate clack of wood knowing wood. Shutters narrow the world to a ribbon of lane, and the air in the cottage turns thoughtful. You pin a sprig of rue above the lintel beside the rowan, twice the charm, twice the optimism, and hang a twist of sage and thyme from a beam so the room breathes like a very small garden. The cat, who thinks it is both priest and physician, chooses a new throne on the warmest tile and radiates authority. Outside, the lane sounds edited. No huckster's cry, no laughter skimming the ditch, only a cart's slow moan and the bell that paces its own way of speaking. Light joke 1. Even the geese practice social distancing, though they call it professional aloofness. You and yours isolate by instinct and by imitation. The door becomes a membrane. Food and favors slide across in bowls and baskets. Words travel by window. A neighbor leaves a trencher's worth of pottage on the sill and takes away a folded cloth with your share of salt. You boil water for small ale and brew on the safe side of custom. The habit tastes like yesterday's wisdom, and you let it. Mainstream fact to anchor your breath. Late medieval Europe will live with plague and waves for centuries after 1347-51, the Black Death years that see mortality in many places reach terrifying fractions. Some chronicles speak of a third, some of half, some of parishes so thin the bells forgot their own names. You bank your fire, you count your candles, and you budget courage by the spoonful. Herbs arrive in cheerful improvised posies, a neighbor's bundle of lavender and mint to clip beneath your nose when you must venture to the well, a saucer of vinegar infused with rosemary to dab on hands and door latches. Someone whispers a recipe called thieves' vinegar, tart as a sermon and twice as corrective. Is it science? Is it morale? Historians still argue whether aromatic fumigations and sour hand washes did anything physiological against plague, or simply made people feel braver while they practiced the truly helpful arts of distance and clean pots. Either way, the cottage smells like a salad that learned self-defense. Light joke 2. If scent alone could stop disease, the village would have weaponized onions centuries ago. Oh wait. We already did. You organize the room into sickbay and everything else. Straw is renewed. Blankets sunned on the hedge when weather leaves a polite window. Bowls scalded until their feelings change. The midwife, the same steady hands that catch babies, knows how to fold cloths, count breaths, and keep the household clock even when the hour is uneven. A monk at the edge of the parish sends word that the almonry can spare broth. You leave a wooden bowl on the boundary stone and find it filled by nightfall, the quiet traffic of kindness that refuses headlines. Mainstream anchor. Monasteries, hospitals, and leper houses often provided hospice-like care and alms in plague time, and parishes organized processions and bread doles when nerves collapsed. Your door stays shut, but hope circulates with the rumor of soup. You remember the flagellant bands you heard about last year. Men who march through towns with backs bare to penance, believing public punishment could unhook the calamity. They did not come down this lane. If they had, the geese would have offered pointed theological feedback. Quirky tidbit. A peddler once swore a slice of raw onion pressed to the ear draws out evil airs, which at least gives the ear something to think about. Historians still argue whether plague traveled chiefly on rat fleas riding ships and cellars, or whether human lice and fleas carried more of the burden than we admit. Your practical conclusion is that fewer bodies in one room, more boiling water, and less borrowing of hats keeps the odds polite. The church bells ring, then fall brief. A clerk comes no nearer than the gate and reads a prayer toward your door as if words could cross walls like sunlight. The beadle tacks a notice on the oak. Market day shortened, stalls spaced, no alehouse singing after sunset. You can almost hear the tavern trying to comply. Light joke 3. The ale has agreed not to sing. It will hum quietly into its sleeve. You keep a watcher's book, really a scrap of board you chalk each day's small victories on. Fever down by a finger width, appetite up by 2 spoonfuls, cough softened by time tea. A child sleeps. The cow snorts her old opinion at the draught, and the rowan sprig holds its color in the dim. You set a rushlight and read the flame like an oracle. Tall means patience. Sputter means another log. Steady means keep breathing this way. You wash and rewash a cloth until it remembers being clean. When you must step into air, you pinch a pomander, orange peels dried and stuffed with herbs if luck allowed, or just a cloth knotted round crushed mint if it didn't, and walk the long way to the well so your shadow doesn't greet anyone else. Rumor knocks again, wearing different feet. Quarantine at the port, 40 days for ships and men. The rule they're calling quarantina that rolls off Venetian tongues like a commandment. Will it help? Will it hold? Historians still argue whether town measures, watchmen at gates, pest houses on the edge, trade slowed to a swallow, slice the curves or simply arrange them. In the cottage, your curve is the only one that matters, the fever that breaks, the breath that evens, the appetite that returns to point at onions and demand they explain themselves. Evenings are a negotiation between fear and furniture. You bank the embers, set a pot to whisper broth into the room, and count. The way you counted oats in section 7. You count intervals now. 3 slow breaths, then a sip. 1 prayer, then sleep. 10 heartbeats, then open the shutter 2 fingers wide. You repair the tally stick of ordinary life by making a notch for each kindness that arrived at the sill. Pottage, a spoon of honey, a sprig of rue, and decide to settle the account with work and bread when the bell allows. Your humor becomes a tool you sharpen by habit, because dull humor cuts no fear. Night presses its ear to the thatch. Somewhere the cart rolls, less often than last year, and the bell takes longer to decide. You sit in the half-dark with your hand around a warm bowl and your back against the bedbox, and you feel the cottage perform its quiet genius trick, turning small acts, steam, soap, space, into grammar your body can parse. Outside, the lane waits. Inside, herbs dry into rustling stars above your head. You keep the door shut, and you keep a place at the fire for the day you open it. You measure the morning by chores that never introduce themselves. The brew kettle murmurs first. Yesterday's mash turning into today's small ale beneath a clean cloth you tied down with a faith knot. Your hands look busy with stirring, but what you're really doing is underwriting the day. Safer drink than the ditch. Calories that commute from grain to cup without paperwork. Mainstream fact to set beside the ladle. In many medieval villages, women are the everyday brewers, brewsters, or alewives, and the assize of bread and ale, Let's inspectors test your honesty as boldly as they test your ale. Light joke 1. If the ale conner sits in a puddle of your brew and his breeches stick, you pass quality control. If you laugh, you fail diplomacy. You spin between stirs, distaff tucked like a tame branch at your elbow. Spindle whirring with that little sleep sound you've come to love. Thread is tomorrow's hose, next month's barter, and a promise you can keep with your own wrists. The lane's winter depends on miles of yarn walked into existence beside hedges and hearths. You hum a churn song as you set the dash going in a second crock. Quirky tidbit. Households often sing to their butter, a rhythm to help the fat find itself. There's a lullaby for nearly everything when time keeps the beat. The cat offers moral support by sleeping near the warmest draft. Historians still argue whether the slow arrival of the spinning wheel in late medieval Europe truly multiplied output in rural homes, or whether the old spindle stayed queen longer than calendars suggest. Your answer is whatever makes thread without sulking. You check the herb beam, sage, thyme, mint, and that uneasy pennyroyal you treat like a strong-minded ant, and then count your birth cloths folded in the chest, linen you keep as carefully as coin. The midwife knocks thrice. You would know that rhythm in your sleep. She steps in with the calm of someone who remembers every baby in the parish by the temperature of the room. Mainstream anchor. Midwifery sits inside a web of female knowledge. Herbs, heat, clean hands, steady voice. And parish priests often license midwives to baptize in emergency. A line of authority that runs straight from bedside to heaven if the hour turns sharp. Light joke 2. Whispered. The midwife is also the only person who can hush the beetle with a look. He knows not to argue with a woman who times contractions for a living. Today's birth waits elsewhere. Your cottage hosts the staging area. Hot water. Heated stones wrapped in cloth, a bit of honey for tired mouths, a prayer pinned beneath the rowan sprig, just in case the saints take attendance. You tuck into your apron a birth girdle, a strip of parchment or cloth painted with prayers and charms, that a neighbor lends house to house. Quirky, yes, but also a way for courage to have a handle. Historians still argue whether such girdles were common tokens or rare luxuries copied by chroniclers more than cradles. What you know is that even a plain ribbon warmed in your hands works on the room like a spell of steadiness. While grown work spirals, small feet chart the perimeter of safety. Your youngest becomes a goose guard, serious as a bishop, stick in hand to referee negotiations between geese and grain. The lane laughs quietly. The geese train the child, not the other way around. Another pair of quick legs runs messages. Tell the brewster I need her dipper. Ask the dairy for whey. Fetch the midwife's salad of herbs from the hedge, not the ditch, because logistics wear shoes here. Mainstream fact to put on the mantle. Children's labor. Tending geese, minding cattle, scaring crows, carrying water, watching babies, glues rural households together. Records and art call them goose girls and herd boys, as if those were job titles, which they are. Light joke 3. If crow scarers were paid by results, crows would own the manor. You send the older child to glean when the gleaning bell rings its fair hour. Instruction is brief and ceremonial. Pick clean, share corners, don't outrun luck. The basket speaks the grammar of survival you've been conjugating all week. Yesterday's oats, today's peas, a dream of pork on a hook from last autumn's heavy acorn mast. A cousin ties a blue thread around the girl's wrist, charm against the evil eye and clumsy ankles. Historians still argue whether folk charms like threads and rowan truly map onto patterns of belief or onto patterns of affection. I love you, therefore not. But either way, the knots stay tied. Midday. The alewife from across the lane arrives with a jack of small ale and the latest regulatory comedy. The ale conner tripped on a dog, sat in the wrong puddle, and declared the green by the oak excellent. You offer a trencher half soaked in pottage as thanks. She leaves it for the neighbor who can't get to the pot today. The children return at intervals with inventories. 6 gleaned heads of barley. A heroic feather found and morally acquired. A report that the beadle frowned at a boy who tried to shorten the definition of common. You direct traffic with your distaff like a marshal's baton. Afternoon slides towards spinning and mending. You darn hose with thread you spun not 2 hours ago, satisfaction neat as the small, even stitches in your lap. A strip of leather becomes a repaired harness in exchange for a scoop of peas. The tally with your neighbor will catch up at harvest, but favors like elasticity better than ink. You warm whey with a pinch of mint and coax it into curds. The child who guards geese receives a bowl, status conferred with a spoon. A tune rises from the churn again, butter lullaby round 2, and you think, not for the first time, that songs are tools as necessary as knives. As light leans, the midwife returns with good news embodied in a bundle. You set a clean rush by the door, and the baby faces it, because someone's grandmother said firelight teaches eyes to love mornings. A tiny mouth learns the village's first language, hunger, and answers it with the second, milk. Historians still argue whether this world after the Black Death opened a brief golden window for women's wages and legal agency, or whether decline and restriction press back too quickly under guilds and courts. Your ledger shows both at once. You brew, spin, midwife, barter, teach, and keep the house's pulse without a title beyond mother, wife, neighbor, hand that finishes what morning started. Night returns with its low arithmetic. You bank the embers, hang the churn lid to dry, set tomorrow's mash to sweeten the air, and count small victories, thread in a ball, butter in a pat, a baby in a warmed cot, geese persuaded to accept curfew, a basket of gleaned barley, a friend who left a honey spoon on your sill because the almoner had a generous hour. Women's work is the village's operating system, invisible when it functions, loud only when it stops. Children are its watchmen, patrolling the borders of grain and gossip with sticks that double as wands. You put the distaff by the door, the rowan where it can keep score, and sleep in a room that hums with soft industry. Kettles settling, curds sighing, and 2 small snores in opposite corners counting the day to bed. The parish announces itself by sound before sight. A single bell hums across the hedges like a hand on your shoulder, then 2 quick notes, one for the hour, one for a reminder nobody admits to needing. You carry a loaf beneath your cloak, warm enough to pretend the weather is better than it is, and head for the church porch, where the stone stays cool in July and reasonable in January. The almoner keeps the parish chest there, iron-bound, heavy as a conscience, with 3 locks, because trust likes company. Mainstream fact to tuck beside your tally stick. Late medieval parishes often manage modest poor relief, bread doles, small coin, and sometimes grain loans, funded by tithes, bequests, and seasonal fundraisers. Monasteries and hospitals add broth and beds when fright grows teeth. Light joke 1. The chest requires 3 keys and 5 opinions to open, which is how you know it's official. Your lane arrives like a weather front, A widow with two thin boys, the beadle pretending his eyebrows are not part of the audit, and you with your trencher half, steeped in last night's pottage and wrapped in clean cloth. The almoner counts loaves, then eyes. He has a gift for arithmetic that starts with faces. Today he gives tokens, little lead discs stamped with a cross, to exchange at the baker when dusk presses too hard. Quirky tidbit. Some parishes mint these dole tokens so the baker can tally charity without emptying his ledger into sentiment. The discs jingle like small, stubborn mercy in an apron pocket. Historians still argue whether parish relief truly cushioned the poorest or mostly recycled help among households already woven into the village's net. In practice, you watch tokens travel from hand to crust without asking for anyone's biography. A woman from the end of the lane coughs in threes, and the church wardens nod toward the sickbed rota. Blankets sun on the hedge when weather allows. Broth travels by bowl when it doesn't. You've kept fever watch enough times to know the drill. Clean linens, boiled spoons, timed tea, patience counted in spoonfuls. The clerk reads a prayer at the door and leaves, voice careful not to step across the threshold uninvited. The lane respects thresholds now the way it respects ditches. Both can swallow you if you get familiar. Inside, the nave smells of beeswax, breath, and faint damp stone, the recipe for public courage. A new guild banner hangs near the rood screen, bright as a berry against winter talk. The Holy Bread Guild promises 1 loaf weekly to members and an emergency loaf to anyone who looks like a candle burning too fast. Mainstream anchor. Lay confraternities and guilds often manage charitable funds, funerals, and mass stipends. They also throw fundraisers, church ales, where supervised drinking and supervised donations repair roofs and reputations. Light joke 2. At a church ale, the ale agrees to behave. The people try. You add your name to the bread list with a borrowed quill, find the spelling you used last year, and feel the odd warmth of continuity. The priest speaks to you about the tithe, a tenth in theory, a negotiation in mud, suggesting grain when coin is sulking. You promise a measure of maslin after harvest. He promises to remind the almoner that your lanes stretch the gleaning bell an extra hour for the widow in April. The village files such credits in an invisible book that always opens to the right page when kindness is the subject. On the south side, a bead roll sits on the lectern, a list of names to be read and remembered. You trace a finger down columns of the gone and feel the bell's tone lengthen inside your chest. The passing bell rang twice last week, heavy and slow. Today the Sanctus bell peals sprightly at noon, and even the geese permit themselves a respectful head tilt. Historians still argue whether bells measurably helped in plague time. Fumigating the air with sound was never the plan, or whether they simply stitched the day into smaller, breathable pieces. To you, each note is a stitch you can feel, pulling dusk together so it doesn't fray. By the porch, a holy water stoop waits with a floating sprig of rosemary. Somebody's quiet upgrade. A child reaches, shakes drops onto her brow, and solemnly anoints the beetle's boots. The beetle pretends not to notice his boots achieving sanctity. A poor box squats beneath a carved saint with the kind of wooden smile that has witnessed centuries of creative accounting and survived. You tip in 2 farthings and a clever stone that looks like one until it clacks. Honesty returns it to your palm with a theatrical cough. Light joke 3. Even the poor box has standards. Across the yard, the hospital house, 2 chambers and a kitchen, breathe stew onto the lane. A sister from the abbey has hands like order, and a laugh that talks bread into rising. She checks your herb posy, sage, thyme, mint, and approves, adding 2 violet leaves with the air of a master mason placing the final stone. Mainstream fact. Hospitals in this period often function less as cure houses than as almshouses. Beds, baths, clean linen, hot food, and prayers, especially valuable when plague or famine shortens tempers and spoons. She reminds you, bathe the hands, boil the spoons, and keep windows polite but open. The rulebook is shorter than the sermon, and more useful. You pass the churchyard wall where a new strip of ground shows fresh mounds and fewer names carved than you'd like. A boy practices bell chiming with a loose rope tied to a hedge stake. The rhythm is wrong, then right, then proud. You think of the watcher's board you chalked the other night, little lines measuring breaths, and decide today's measure shall be bell strokes and bread tokens, 2 of each already, which feels like a plan when plans are thin. Dusk pools like ink in the furrows. The bell lifts 3 evening notes that slide down the lane and under doors. And homes answer with pinpricks of rushlight, the village lighting itself from within like a beehive. You tuck 2 tokens into the widow's palm, a spoonful of honey into her boy's mouth, and your warm trencher into the almoner's basket for the house that is not boiling tonight. The beadle's eyebrows declare the day officially adequate. Walking home, you match your steps to the bell's slow finish and feel how the parish turns coin into crust, fear into chores, and rumor into rules short enough to memorize. Historians still argue whether the parish was a net that caught the falling or a rope that chafed as often as it saved. Your feet vote for net tonight. The geese meet you at the corner, file you through inspection, and accept your whispered report. Bread loans issued, bells behaving, stew secured. They grant passage with a committee honk. You open your door to the smell of thyme and warm wood and set the tokens beside the rowan sprig, 2 small circles of lead, proof that tomorrow, like the bell, intends to ring. Market day rearranges your bones into a carrying frame. You hook the basket over your arm, eggs cushioned in straw, a twist of rough wool from last week's spindle, 2 oatcakes tucked for courage, and join the little river of feet toward the market cross. Cartwheels say sentences about potholes. Hens comment on everything. The geese form a delegation to ensure you represent the lane adequately. If last week was about stretching supper, this is about swapping mornings, turning winter crafts into spring insurance. Salt, iron, needles, and 1 improbable orange ribbon if the children plead like poets. Mainstream fact to knot to your strap. By charter and custom, many villages and towns hold weekly markets and annual fairs, regulated by borough courts that police weights and measures, stall fees, and who gets to sell what where. The L-wand, a standard wooden rule, lies ready on the bailiff's table to measure cloth. The brass weights sit like squat judges by the scales. Light joke 1. The bailiff's eyebrows, like the beetles, are an unofficial measuring device that detects short ounces at 20 paces. Your first stop is the salt man, his barrels sweating with the sea's memory. Salt is winter's lock and summer's insurance. Without it, pork turns into a short story with a sad ending. You bargain with eggs, 4 today, 2 tomorrow, and a spindle's worth of singles, coarse yarn. Then sweeten the deal with a promise to mend his wife's hose. He slides you a palm of bay salt and an extra pinch because your rowan sprig, pinned in your hat, reminds him of his mother. Quirky tidbit. Some towns require sellers to use a trick bushel, a standard basket with a little iron boss hidden under the rim to prevent honest bushels from becoming ambitious. Honest measure is theater, and everyone attends. Across the square, the ironmonger arranges a bright syllabary. Nails, bodkins, awls, a stack of plowshares that look like promises pressed thin. You trade the wool hank and 2 eggs for a small sewing needle, luxury measured in survival, and a handful of nails you can hear clinking into future repairs. Historians still argue whether the monetization of rural life deepened sharply after the Black Death, rents commuting to cash, wages rising, or whether villages were already quietly threaded with coin and barter long before the plague. Your purse contains 3 pennies, a broken farthing, and a courage shaped like a tally notch. You decide the debate is less important than the needle. At the fish stall, split herring glisten like silver commas in a long argument with hunger. You save your pennies for later and settle for a sniff and a promise. The ale conner wanders past, grinning, his breeches mercifully dry. He lifts 2 fingers in salute, and you lift 2 eggs in reply. Professional courtesy between liquids and breakfast. Beside the cheesemonger, a man cracks charcoal billets and talks in the proud, sooty accent of the wood. This is one of your side hustles. When pasture sleeps and fields sulk, you join a winter crew heaping charcoal clamps. Low, earth-sealed mounds that smolder wood into light, clean fuel for smiths. He offers a small sack on credit for the smithy boy's christening gift. You offer a day's help when the wind is right. Light joke 2. Charcoal keeps secrets so well that even your apron forgets what color it started. You circulate your winter crafts like a quiet merchant. 2 rushlights dipped and dried, small domestic suns, go to a widow who pays with linen thread. 3 spoons whittled from hedge offcuts swap for a whetstone. A basket you plaited by the marsh trades for dye-wode crumbs to fix a ribbon's blue. Quirky tidbit. At some fairs, traveling toymen sell paternoster beads by the string, and badges stamped with saints and jokes. Pilgrim souvenirs that double as conversation armor. A child tucks one into a cap and stands taller by an inch. Historians still argue whether fairs like the Champagne markets truly reached deep into villages like yours, or mostly touched merchants' purses. Your market is humbler, but entirely global in intent. If a thing exists, someone here wants to swap it for eggs. You pause at the weighing beam to watch the bailiff test a butcher's pound. The counterpoise settles, the brows settle with it, and the day keeps flowing. A peddler sings a ribbon song and displays pins, miracles of wire and patience. You buy 2 because mending without pins is like bargaining without jokes. A child at your hem drills you for honey. You compromise on pepper. 3 grains in a twist of paper. Greater magic than saints for making pottage remember feast days. Mainstream anchor. Exotic spices, pepper, saffron, even ginger, do reach ordinary kitchens in crumbs and holidays, filtered through layers of trade and shaved into soups when someone marries, sickens, or recovers. Light joke 3. 3 peppercorns can make a pot feel aristocratic for the length of 1 spoonful, and then go back to being democratic. Under the market cross, a clerk reads the assize for the week. Loaf weight, ale price, and posts a notice. Fair next month on the eve of the saint. Stalls by lot, no hawking outside lines. Minstrels licensed to be interesting but not scandalous. You think of those hard-won commutations and the iron you've been investing in. How coin and craft braid with custom-like threads on your distaff. You scribble a note in the margin of your mind ledger. Before the fair, finish 2 baskets, twist a longer candle, and collect the oats owed from last week's ditching swap. On the edge of the square, you join 3 neighbors at the clothier's wagon to sell your rough wool. He fingers the twist, pronounces it honest, and pays partly in coin, partly in fuller's earth, for scouring, and a skein of nicer yarn that will make a Christmas cap behave. Historians still argue whether rural proto-industry, spinning, weaving, fulling, was a sideline or a quiet revolution. Your fingers argue for revolution when they ache and for sideline when the geese demand arbitration. By midday your basket is lighter, and your pockets heavier with useful smallness. Nails, a needle, salt, pins, a whetstone, 3 peppercorns, a promise, and 2 compliments you intend to spend later. You sit on the steps with neighbors to split an oatcake and a small ale. The child counts badges and crows at a tin saint that looks like the beetle on a good hair day. A jongleur flips 2 knives in a joke. The knives land clean, the joke lands cleaner. The clerk chases a clipped coin to the gutter. You all clap when it loses. Home by the hedgeway, you pass the market tollstone and pay with a nod. The geese meet you for debrief. You show them the pepper, deep interest, then the pins, deep suspicion, and finally the salt, which they approve as if they had invented oceans. You hang the new needle on a string near the rowan sprig, a tiny sword for mending fights with cloth. This is what market day buys that fields cannot. Edges, sharp, bright, durable, countable, plus the promises that ride home in your pocket like warm pebbles. Tomorrow the plow and churn will resume their music, but tonight you sort your little hoard on the table and feel the room grow steadier. Iron for hinges, salt for pork, pins for hems, pepper for morale, and 1 ribbons blue for the smallest, loudest hat. You open the door and step into a weatherproof argument that works. 1 roof, many breaths. The cottage is a timber frame set on a shallow stone footing, walls woven wattle and buttered with daub, clay, straw, a little dung, so the wind must negotiate before entering. Above, thatch lies thick as a sleepy ox, eaves low enough to pat when you come home late. A central hearth holds the room like a star holds a small sky. Smoke climbs, thinks better of it, and settles into a high, dark ceiling where bacon learns philosophy. Mainstream fact to hang on the beam. Across much of late medieval northern Europe, ordinary houses are 1 or 2 room timber structures with wattle and daub walls, thatch roofs, and a central open hearth. True chimneys spread unevenly and late, often sheltering people and animals under the same span for warmth and watch. Light joke 1. The official village smoke hole is called the door, a little wider than usual. Your bed is a box bed along the wall, boards closing at night to keep drafts on the far side of the story. A settle bench faces the fire, polished by family and the occasional visiting cat who claims it for the union. Pegs shoulder your week, ladles, quern handle, the good spindle, the better knife. The floor is hard earth with fresh rushes strewn and herbs stitched in. Sweet flag, meadow sweet, mint, a green grammar that asks feet to behave. Historians still argue whether the famous moldy rushes never changed is fair or mostly a later slander. Parish accounts for rush bearing and household notes about seasonal floor changes suggest you sweep more than the jokes allow. Either way, you know the smell of new rush means company, and the beetle pretending not to look impressed. A smoke shelf near the rafters is your pantry in the past tense. Strips of pork from last autumn's heavy acorn mast, skeins of cheese slowly ambering, sprigs of sage and thyme turning crisp enough to break shyness in a pot. Smoke blackens the beams, kisses meat into patience, and rudely interviews mosquitoes until they look for other careers. Quirky tidbit to hold in the warm hand of memory. Some houses tuck a house leak, semper vivum, in the thatch. Part lightning charm, part bragging rights that your roof grows virtues as well as leaks. Light joke 2. Between the smoke discouraging insects and the cat discouraging mice, you are nearly a luxury inn, provided your guests enjoy a bacon-scented halo. At the far end, the buyer breathes. 1 cow, sometimes 2, a pen for a calf that has opinions, and in winter a sheep guest if negotiations with the geese go well. Their slow lungs lift the room's temperature by a kindness you can feel at ankle height. You bank the bedding, litter of straw and bracken, mucked and replaced with the metric you learned by nose. And when spring gives you a dry week, you march that mix to the fallow so the 3-field dance keeps its rhythm. Mainstream anchor. Mixed housing of human and animal is common at the smallholding scale. Not romance, not misery. Just biomass management that turns hay into heat and manure into next year's bread. Your Louvre, if the roof is feeling aristocratic, or a simple moved shingle, if it isn't, lets weather out and stories in. On a good day, the smoke threads itself into a neat ribbon. On a bad day, it rehearses for sainthood and fills the room with reminders about humility and open doors. The rushlight behaves as long as you trim it. The tallow candle saves itself for counting and baptisms in a hurry. Historians still argue whether glass window panes were a rare treat outside towns before the 15th century, or whether small quarries of glass filtered earlier than we think. Your cottage uses oiled linen and good manners, open for light, shut for argument. Along one wall, a chest keeps linen and the birth cloths from the midwife's last visit. The household's coin purse in fabric form. Another holds a grain bin with a lid that squeaks like a steward when you open it. Inside sits the oath you made to yourself, that the bin will never be empty without a plan. Near the door hangs your half-tally stick, debt and promise shaped like a bookmark for tomorrow, and above it, the faithful rowan sprig, red as a remembered feast day. The ale tub hums a low hymn, and the pickle crock murmurs vinegar threats to anything that dreams of spoiling. In the corner, a tiny garderobe bucket minds its own business. Outside, a trench minds it better. You scatter wood ash the way a tidy mind sprinkles commas, everywhere that makes sentences flow. Scholars still argue whether rural sanitation lagged behind urban or simply looked different. Your rulebook fits on a spoon. Boil what you drink, burn what offends, bury what insists, and never trust a wind that smells like regret. Light joke 3. The geese announce loudly when anyone forgets Rule 3, a contribution they perform with zeal. Roof talk is a season by itself. Thatch wants trimming, pinning, and the occasional thatching spar, those cute twisted willow pegs, to keep it honest in a gale. You stroke the eaves the way some people stroke dogs. Countless winters have taught you that being kind to roofs teaches them to be kind back. A sparrow pops out of the reed like an idea and is gently reminded this is a loan, not a mortgage. If rain behaves, the roof gives back a distinct music, the comfort of 1,000 small hands pattering. Still here, still here. Neighbors step in sideways because the door opens into lives rather than into a foyer. They bring news, the miller's gear mended at last. Gossip, the ale conner sat in the wrong puddle again. And help, a hinge, 3 stitches, a comb of honey for someone who earned it by getting through the afternoon. The settle swallows them. The pottage stretches without complaint. The beetle's eyebrows are briefly stored on the peg by the door so friendship can speak plainly. This house holds counsel the way a mitt holds bread, warm because it must. When weather sulks, you work the house as if it were a field. Smoke cures the ceiling, fire dries shoes filled with yesterday's ditch, curds set in the quiet byre heat, a basket starts itself under your fingers. A needle from market day mends a sleeve into a stronger sentence than it was born with. You pace out the floorboards like a priest with a private liturgy. Sweep, mend, stir, bank, check, sweep, mend, stir, bank, check. By evening, the soot on the joists has written you a small, true poem. Warmth has weight, and you made most of it. Night comes and the room lowers its voice. You set the rushlight to whisper, bank the hearth till it glows like a memory, and tuck the children into the box bed where the world reduces to heartbeat, linen, and a roof you trust. The cow sighs theology. The geese, off stage, dream of enforcement. The house smells of oak smoke and thyme. Of wool and a day put away neatly. You lie down inside your own invention. Timber, daub, rush, smoke, rule of thumb. And feel the strange, ordinary triumph of a space that turns weather into furniture and neighbors into heat. Tomorrow, as always, you'll open the door and spill the warmth into the lane, and the lane will return it by evening, counted and cooked. Whispers travel faster than carts. You hear them first where hedges meet. A carter speaking softly to a miller, a peddler scratching a map into dust with a pin, a widow who remembers a year when bells rang for more than vespers. Names ride the whisper. Jacquerie in France when lords learned how many pitchforks make a decision. 1381 in England when men from fields met in London and asked the crown to count them properly. Remensa in Catalonia when peasants argued that bad customs were exactly that, bad, and offered silver to bury them. Mainstream fact to lay flat on the table. After the Black Death, labor grew dear, wages grew bold, and authorities passed rules like the Statute of Laborers, 1351, to pin them back in place, fixing rates, chasing idlers, and trying to staple wind to a wall. Light joke 1. Wind objects to staples, and walls dislike being blamed for breezes. The steward's ledger still arrives, but your arithmetic feels less lonely. You rehearse what the village already knows by heart. When to bow, Sunday and tax day. When to bargain, every other day. When to commute a labor service into coin, and when to say, I'll bring the coin next quarter, and the court will nod because the bridge you fixed last spring still stands. You and your neighbors didn't wake up radicals. You woke up practical, which is more dangerous to brittle systems than slogans. A cousin returns from a chartered town and repeats the line he heard twice at a tavern and once in a sermon. Town air makes free. The old German proverb, Stadtluft macht frei. If you can breathe it for a year and a day without being hauled back by a lord's memory. Historians still argue whether the saying mapped onto consistent law across regions or was patchier, more hope than statute. Your version of the law is called, Don't Go Alone, and know which gate guard likes pears. At the manor court you practice bargains with manners. Winter ditching for a Martinmas groat. 2 hens now to erase 1 day of corvée in haying time. Consent to use the Lord's oven at a reduced banality if the mill gear fails again. Your half-tally stick taps your thigh like a drum teacher. Keep the beat. Keep the promises. Keep the neighbors willing to speak for you when the steward forgets a footnote. Quirky tidbit. An old man in the lane swears you can tell whether a charter favors the folk or the Lord by the color of its wax. Green for land and long memory, red for heat and haste. His theory likely owes more to gossip than chancery, but it gives the children something earnest to investigate. Whispers fatten into petitions. The reeve let slip that a traveling priest, one John Ball by rumor's measure, preaches a sharp couplet in market squares. When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman? The rhyme's edge fits neatly into the crack already running through your week. You aren't planning a march, you're planning leverage. Hire your team to the abbey for a day, make coin, buy salt, return, then speak to the steward with the salt quietly present on the table like a second witness. If he insists on you threshing on Thursday, you show him Wednesday's mill receipt and smile as if the paper were a small, well-fed dog ready to bark. Light joke 2. Documents multiply faster than rabbits. Unlike rabbits, they can't be stewed, so you learn to shelter them. Some evenings the hedges murmur harder. A tanner says tacksmen walk the next valley counting hearths like eggs. A peddler swears that in London commoners told a young king his realm sits on more than noble shoulders. A clerk says he replied like a promise and later like a retraction. Historians still argue whether 1381 was a true class revolt, a tax riot with excellent speeches, or a many-headed thing that can't be trimmed into one story. Your lane translates the debate into instructions. Don't be first, don't be alone, don't be late to church, and don't forget bread for the widow while history finishes arguing. You also hear of letters of manumission, freedom purchased like a good plowshare, of copyhold replacing servile tenure, of money rents nosing corvée out of the calendar because coin behaves better than sore shoulders at harvest. A neighbor's boy returns from a fair with news that a lord 2 parishes over sold himself a new reputation. Reduced labor services and a clean custom will read aloud under the lime tree, witnessed by every eyebrow within 3 miles. You watch your own steward more closely. He watches you the way cats watch open doors. The beadle, who is nobody's fool, pretends he doesn't hear plans and helps you choose words that satisfy custom while tugging it a finger's width forward. He knows if the village breaks, he loses his best audience. You practice speaking in the grammar of respect. As the roll shows, as the court remembers, as the weather requires. If you must say no, you say it in units the court can swallow. No on Thursday, yes on Monday with a cart. No to the full fine. Yes to half and a hedge mended by Lammas. Light joke 3. In a village, diplomacy is the art of saying perhaps in a way that makes no sound like a saint's feast. Meanwhile, plans for leaving hang on pegs like spare cloaks. A daughter with quick fingers and clean sums might hire to a clothier in town. A son with a good back and a better grin might vanish toward the river barges and return only as rumors in pepper and pins. Historians still argue whether outmigration bled villages or fed them. Coin sent home, skills brought back, fewer mouths in a year that sulks. You keep both doors ajar in your mind. One out, one in. The lane's secret constitution holds, mutual surety and tithings. Frank pledge every half year to remind the rowdy that the quiet are watching. Parish ales to fund both roofs and reconciliation. If anyone asks what you want from all this whispering, your answer isn't revolution. It's room. Enough room to plant oats where wheat failed, to trade corvée for coin when the cow calves, to say yes to your own schedule without asking a man who has never met your potatoes. Dawn of a legal day. You stand by the manor oak. Half tally in your pocket, rowan sprig in the lintel, geese posted as sarcastic counsel, and you speak your piece, polite, accurate, relentless. The steward writes, the jury nods, the beadle's eyebrows authorize reality. A small service becomes a smaller payment. A late fee becomes a later fee. A custom that bruised turns into one that fits like a boot worn in by honest miles. The charter you carry home isn't parchment. It's the lane itself, signed with footprints, sealed with work, enacted with a loaf, divided the way the almoner taught you under the church porch. You set your half-tally by the door and look around the house. Timber, daub, smoke, byre, bench, the whole choir. You're not free in the way poets flatter, but your week is freer than last year's, and last year's freer than your grandmother's. Whispers cross hedges like swallows. Some turn into storms that never visit your lane. Some turn into bargains you can actually use. Tonight you bank the fire, count your pins and peppercorns from market day, and listen to the geese explain constitutional theory at volume. Tomorrow you'll bow where it's sensible, bargain where it's possible, and speak where it's necessary. For a peasant, that's a charter you can live inside. After sickness, the village learns new arithmetic. The bell rings thinner, yes, but each stroke seems to carry farther, as if fewer hands make sound travel with more purpose. In the furrows, your team steps out and finds more room between hedges. On market day, the smith's door stands open longer. At the manor court, the steward watches coin as if it has learned to walk on its own. Labor is scarce. Time is suddenly valuable in a voice you can hear. You feel your back straighten the way a bow does when it learns a better string. Mainstream fact to set on the table. In the generations after the Black Death, many parts of Western Europe record rising money wages and lower grain prices, so the real earnings of surviving workers improve, even as laws like the Statute of Laborers try to peg them back to yesterday. Light joke 1. The statute says, stand still. Your stomach says, walk faster. And your feet vote with your stomach. You test the new math close to home. At harvest, the reeve posts need for mowers. Last year they could choose you. This year, you can choose them. You bargain days by the sheaf instead of by the shrug. And when the steward scowls, the jury of neighbors stares back in their usual useful formation. You've learned to commute labor into coin and coin back into time. 2 groats now so you may plow your own strip when the weather actually cooperates, not when the ledger thinks it will. You pocket your half-tally stick, feel the notches read like sentence breaks, and realize punctuation now favors the reader. In the fields, cropping plans loosen. Wheat keeps its pride, but oats and rye swagger more openly. Pulses claim acreage without apology. Some strips that never quite earned their keep drift toward pasture, and your buyer answers with fuller pails and a calmer winter. You hang more cheese near the smoke-black rafters, and the cow's breath writes a warmer poem into the room. Diet, that quiet politician, passes a friendlier bill. More dairy, some meat more often than feast days, and pottage that practices generosity instead of only geometry. Historians still argue whether these gains reached most households, or chiefly those already well-placed, and whether prices sneaked upward to erase the raise. Your bowl says improvement tastes like beans plus butter, and your belt agrees every other week. With hands scarce, tools talk louder. The moldboard plow gets a new share sooner. Horse collars receive more beeswax and fewer excuses. The wheelwright's rim doesn't wait for Lent to be honest. You notice how a village invests differently when time refuses to be cheap. An extra iron tip on the shelf. A second quern so 2 hands grind while one stirs. A stash of whetstones that makes knives behave like citizens. Quirky tidbit. The ale conner, bored of sitting in puddles, offers himself as an efficiency expert, declares the church ale queue a public safety hazard, and reorganizes it. The parish rewards him with a trencher and a look. The ledger's weather changes. Merchet fees soften. Harriets get argued into smaller animals or into coin. Copyhold rents, recorded tenure with predictable terms, replace the old haze for some strips, and the customel becomes a book you can actually read by rushlight. Your cousin shows off a manumission letter bought with 5 patient years of wages. The seal looks like a red berry from your rowan sprig. You're happy for him, and happier still that you can stay, plant, and parlay on better terms. Historians still argue whether the slope of unfree tenure down toward freer forms was steady or stepwise, and whether the enclosure stories that darkened the 16th century were already nibbling hedges in your era. Your hedge remains a hedge today, and you keep a friend at the far end who counts pigs with the soul of a bookkeeper. Markets feel different too. Salt is still non-negotiable, needles still luxuries you protect like a secret. But you buy peppercorns more often than weddings and childbirths. Your lane's side hustles, rushlights, baskets, charcoal, rise from survival embroidery to income with opinions. You notice servant wages bid up in town. A daughter negotiates a place with shoes thrown in and a livery hood in winter. Her letters home, dictated yes, but flavored with her, carry prices and rumors like carefully folded spice. The fair clerk talks faster. The L1 chooses honesty over drama more days than not. You acquire a second pin because dignity likes symmetry. Even church math changes tone. Not long ago the almoner counted faces. Now he counts gifts, because survivors remember how the soup tasted and pay it forward. A bigger bread dole before winter, a repaired hospital roof, more candles lit at the plowlight because people allow themselves to hope for crops, not just endurance. This year's church ale sings longer, carefully, and the beadle lets both eyebrows rest so he can clap on the offbeat. You measure the change in smaller, sharper ways. The beadle, who once inspected stints with a scowl, now inspects them with a shrug and a suggestion. The steward, whose voice carried like cold cloth at the very start, still rustles parchment, but he rustles it slower when you place your mill receipt and market tokens beside it like polite witnesses. The geese remain equal opportunity critics. They honk at progress with the same zeal they honk at carts, but you sense even they approve of fuller bowls and straighter furrows. Light joke too. The geese claim to have invented labor scarcity, citing their union rules on nap frequency. Not every lane in Christendom learns the same sums. You hear of eastern lands where lords tightened fists and nailing peasants down became policy. A story that makes your rowan sprig feel suddenly important and your half-tally suddenly tender. You also hear of coastal parishes where fisheries fattened diets, and of upland places where wool became so bossy that grain was told to move along. Historians still argue whether the period is best read as a golden age for laborers or a brief, bright window with clouds assembling. Your window has clear glass maybe one day in 10, oiled linen the rest, but even linen lets in more light than last year's rumor. So you write the new arithmetic into habit. You keep commons rules tight so pasture holds. You mend harness early so the team pulls soft. You negotiate before you obey. You bake a bigger maslin loaf when the parish chest looks shy. You set aside seed the day you thresh. You add 2 peppercorns to pottage when the house has earned a grin. Light joke 3. You even let the ale conner reorganize your spoon drawer for efficiency, then change it back the next morning for sanity. Night collects under the thatch, and the house answers with a glow that feels more deliberate than before. You bank the fire, touch the rowan, tap the tally, and listen for the bell that insists on measuring hope in even strokes. After sickness, new arithmetic. Fewer hands, higher wages, fewer voices, clearer bargains, fewer illusions, better meals. You are not free of lords or weather, but you are freer in the places that feed you. Tomorrow's list will still be long. It will also be yours to reorder. Night learns your name and uses the gentle version. The hearth is banked into a low red geography. Hollows of coals like little valleys, a ridge of ash that keeps tomorrow from forgetting you. You sit on the settle with the good knife, trimming a splinter from a thatching spar you'll need when the wind remembers its hobby. On the peg by the door, Your half-tally stick taps the wall each time the cow shifts in the byre. The sound is the cottage's metronome, counting what you owe and what you're owed in the same calm beat. You inventory in the language that works here. Seed in the bin under oiled linen, peppercorns in their paper twist, pins threaded on string like tiny arguments won, cheese curing above the smoke, salt in a crock that pretends to be a small moon. The rowan sprig over the lintel keeps its red like a stubborn thought you've chosen to believe. Outside, the lane has turned into privacy. The bell gives one careful note for Compline from the church and then tucks itself in. You listen to the rafters settle, the thatch tick, the cow breathe the old sermon about hay becoming warmth, warmth becoming sleep. Mainstream fact to tuck into this lull. In many late medieval villages, the agricultural year pivoted on a handful of named days: Candlemas, Lammas, Michaelmas, Martinmas, when rents fell due, hirings were set, and the calendar braided fieldwork to feast. Those dates live in your pockets like smooth stones. You rub them when the steward clears his throat. Light joke 1. The geese, who run a very strict liturgical calendar of their own, observe only 2 feasts, breakfast and everyone move, because we said so. You think across the year you've just walked, commons at dawn, the 3-field dance under a changeable sky, pottage and pickles arguing their way into dinner, iron and horse collars turning mud into cooperation, court rolls bending just enough to let families breathe, lean weeks stretched with oats and nettles, isolation that smelled of time and courage, women's craft and children's patrols humming like a mill, parish alms and bells suturing fear, market edges, salt, pins, needles, stitched into the week, a house that turns weather into furniture, whispers and bargains instead of slogans, and, lately, an arithmetic kinder to labor. Historians still argue whether these survivals added up to a peasant golden age after the plague, or only a brief window before prices, enclosures, and new laws pressed back. You argue that windows matter, even if you have to oil the linen and prop it open with a ladle. A soft rap at the shutter, a neighbor's whisper. You pass out a still warm trencher half and receive back the baker's token he owed since yesterday. Lead warmed by a palm, promise completed. Quirky tidbit to slip between the coals. Some folks swear by turning the cat, lifting it gently and setting it down again, to change the luck of a room before a journey. Your cat declines on principle, but you turn the rushlight wick and the day's fortune feels sufficiently amended. Light joke 2. The cat schedules luck adjustments strictly between naps, which is to say rarely. You count calves in your head as if numbers were straw you could stack against draft and doubt. One weaned and opinionated. One due when the hawthorn blooms. One only a hope written in the cow's improved appetite. You count favors too. The almoner's extra scoop in the Lent that wouldn't end. The beadle's eyebrows voting yes when your commutation made sense. The smith who saved you a spare share without fanfare. The alewife who left a jack on the sill the night your courage underperformed. Light joke 3. Even the ale conner earns a line. He reorganized the church ale queue so professionally that gossip flowed faster and gave up on being dangerous. You sketch tomorrow without moving your hand. Borrow the wheelwright's rim early. Swap 2 hours spinning for a measure of peas. Retie the plow line where it frayed. Cut a faggot from the far hedge if the beetle has his generous face on. Bring a little honey to the widow who coughs when the weather turns sideways. Show your boy again how the gleaning bell means start and stop, not elbows. Somewhere in the plan sits a conversation with the steward that begins, as the roll shows, and ends with you coming home earlier than last year. The small ale on the table is polite. It won't sing, just hum. You lift it like a punctuation mark and think how so much survival here is editing, cutting panic, adding neighbors, revising the schedule when the cloud argues in the wrong direction. You drift through old debates, ergot or rumor, horse or ox, copyhold or custom, and let the arguments pasture themselves. The cow, who has strong opinions on oxen, approves this method. Embers lower, voices lower, the room lowers itself around you like a warm cloak. You set the tally flat, touch the rowan, and put the knife to bed under the bench where it dreams of breadboards. Tomorrow will be work again. Mud shaking hands, bells consulting, geese enforcing, stewards rehearsing, tools answering. But tonight is for the arithmetic of enough. Enough seed to sow, enough hands to hold. Enough jokes to keep soup interesting, enough custom to bend without breaking. The cottage sighs. You answer. Quiet has a weight. You have learned to lift it. Let the room go softer as if someone has laid a shawl across the rafters. The fire rests, a dim red island under a pale blanket of ash, and the last curl of smoke writes something gentle on the air that you don't have to read. Your breath matches that small, steady glow, in and out. Each one a warm footprint on a well-known floor. The cow turns once in the byre, slow and careful, finding that comfortable hollow creatures find when they trust the night. You let your shoulders find their hollow too. Listen for the almost nothing sounds that prove the world is willing to hold you. Thatch ticking back into place, a spoon settling in a bowl, the quiet weight of a door bar lying true. Imagine the commons at dawn already waiting for you, meadow rinsed with dew, hedges pearled, the path familiar and unhurried. Picture the field strips resting, winter grain dreaming tight in the soil, spring grain imagining green, the fallow humming under starlight, with no hurry, no scold, just the patience that earth keeps. Let the bell from the church ring far away, not a call now, only a memory of one, smoothing the edges of the lane until even the geese yawn. Breathe again, slower. The list is folded and set aside. Seed will be seed tomorrow. Favors will remember themselves. The steward will arrive at the hour he always does, and your words will queue patiently, ready to be said, and then let go. For now, keep only the small, soft arithmetic of this moment. A roof you trust, a bed that knows your name, a warm echo in your hands where tools were, a warm echo in your chest where gratitude lives. If sleep wants a story, tell it the one about coals that learn to be stars. If morning needs you, it will find you. For now, drift.